Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Jessica Perkins-Smith, and I'm the University Archivist here at MSU Libraries. And I'd just especially like to thank all of you for coming today, and especially our panelists who've all traveled to be here. Some of them as far as from Maine. So I'd like to thank them for being here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. This project has been in the works for a long time, and I'm excited for you to hear some of the stories and experiences of some of the very first Black students at Mississippi State. I first wanted to start by telling you a little bit about how this particular project came to be. Colonel Barnes and I met virtually, Colonel Robert Barnes, if you'll wave. Colonel Barnes and I met virtually during COVID in the fall of 2020. And I was working on a project, a display, an exhibit, and you'll see some of those panels here, on the first Black student organization here at Mississippi State, which was Afro-American Plus, which was founded in 1968. And Colonel Barnes and several of these panelists were active in that student organization. So Colonel Barnes and I were put in touch, and he helped me immensely with the project. And we just kind of stayed in touch, we stayed friends. He's a fellow Saints fan, so who dat? And we stayed in touch, and he's spoken to I teach an honors class on Black history at Mississippi State, and he's spoken to my class a couple of times. And about a year and a half ago, I think it was, I had to go back to my emails and figure out when this started. About a year and a half ago, he reached out and he said, you know, some of us are getting together and have this kind of very broad vision for how we want to document the stories of what they're calling the pioneers, these first Black students at Mississippi State. And there really were pioneers from 1965 to 1975. This is right after Freedom Summer, right after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And so starting, of course, with Dr. Holmes in 1965, but most of these folks came in just in those following years when there still weren't very many African-American students here. So we started kind of this collaborative campus-wide project involving folks from the Office of Public Affairs and our Inclusive Excellence Office. We've had some name changes, and our Alumni Affairs as well. And so we've worked collaboratively for about the past year and a half to, and there's several different elements of this project. One is oral histories and interviews from these pioneers. There's going to be an academic article coming out of this. Don Schaefer's writing an article related to this. And so I kind of was trying to figure out how the library could fit in. Obviously, we preserve these materials. We have a lot of these materials already in the library. And Colonel Barnes and I had a lot of discussions, and it kept coming back to the Reflector, the student newspaper. And he said, you know, the Reflector is just such this great resource, and there's so many great stories, and kind of really tells you that it's such a good primary source, but it's only accessible here in this building, either through bound copies or through microfilm. And it's used a lot. Folks come from all over the place to use our Reflector, but it's not easily accessible by anybody unless you come here to Starkville. So we decided that we'd focus on that 10-year period of the Reflector, 65 to 75. So Colonel Barnes kind of made our reading room on the 4th floor his second home for months. He got to know pretty much everybody in our department. He and several other alumni worked on that project, and together they identified over 600 articles, advertisements, and images from that first 10 years of the Reflector. And they're all digitized now, thank you to our digital archivist and our digital archive staff, several of our grad students. This really kind of was a collaborative project. And it is live now, I'm happy to say, and accessible to researchers. And if later on you want to check out the QR code on the back of your program, that'll give you access to that collection. So this is kind of how the library, I felt like, could tell this story, could preserve it, and then make it available to researchers. So now I'm excited to introduce our panelists, and I'm just going to go from the beginning. This is Colonel Robert Barnes. Colonel Barnes is from Brookhaven and graduated from Mississippi State in 1972. He was in the ROTC and was commissioned to the U.S. Army, where he served 31 years. He worked in logistics for various corporations before retirement. He's a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and is married to retired Brigadier General Margaret Barnes, who's here with him today. Dr. Harvest Collier grew up here in Starkville, and he has 3 degrees from Mississippi State. As we were walking into the building, he said, "There's the hand lab. That's where I spent most of my time." And he has 3 degrees from here, a BS, an MS, and a PhD, all in chemistry. He worked as a chemical researcher at Dow Chemical and was a professor of chemistry at the Missouri University of Science and Technology, where he served in several academic leadership roles. He and his wife Shirley live in Collierville, Tennessee. Mr. Doug Milton grew up in Laurel, Mississippi, and enrolled at MSU in 1970, where he met his future wife, Linda Robinson. And they got married, and he entered the Air Force in 1972. They moved to Florida, but returned to Starkville in 1976, this time with a young daughter in tow, and they both graduated in 1979, and together were commissioned as second lieutenants in the U.S. Air Force. Doug spent 28 years in the U.S. Air Force before working in leadership roles for electronic data systems and Perot systems, and Linda served for 4 years in the Air Force and spent over 35 years in the aerospace defense industry. They currently live in Thomaston, Maine. And Mr. Vernon White grew up in Greenville and entered Mississippi State in 1971. Hale State. He became the first black track scholarship athlete and really helped to develop and build the team and encourage more black athletes to join the team when they became very good. He majored in physical education and recreation here at MSU and taught special education in early childhood, as well as coached multiple sports. He lives in Yazoo City and is married to Miss Maxine Barnett, who's here as well. Our panel is going to begin today. We kind of have one of the themes of this project in these oral histories, and you'll see if you pick up a booklet, some of these stories are written down. And Mr. Ambrose Martin, can I have you raise your hand? So Ambrose is not one of the pioneers, but he graduated in '91, I believe. And he and Colonel Barnes have been heading up this project, and he's provided us today with these pioneer booklets that tell these stories of many of these first 10 years of Mississippi State students. So the pattern of the interview has been, talk to me about your time before Mississippi State, tell me about your time here at Mississippi State, and what did you do afterwards, and maybe how has Mississippi State impacted your life and your career, your family. And so that's going to be what we do today. I'm not going to ask a lot of questions. I'm just going to keep an eye on the time a little bit. And we will have some time at the end for questions and for Q&A. I believe we're ready to get started. Colonel Barnes is I'm going to let you kick it off.
Hi, everybody. Over. We're now in session. The title is Ring Your Bell and Tell Your Tale. That's one of those 3 o'clock in the morning. This is, okay, that's what we're going to call it. I'm from Brookhaven, Mississippi, which is nowhere near Starkville. The only way I got up here is through the 4-H Club. Back in 1967, 68-ish, our colored county agent had a friend of mine, and he said, instead of going to Alcorn this year to do our 4-H Club, they call them demonstrations or projects, we're going to go to Mississippi State. I said, where's that? Yeah, where? So, long story short about that, we came up here, we did our demonstration. It was a group of folks that did their project, and I'll just be honest with you, my friend and I, we nailed it. I mean, the other kids were falling all over their placards and everything, but they didn't look like us. And so at the end of it, when we knew we had won, because we had won at Alcorn for years and years and years and years, I asked him, I said, why didn't we win? He says, well, we're not going exactly by points. Just think about that. I'm 16, 17 years old. We're not going by points. I grew up in the segregated South. I was born in 1950 in Harvest, and I often talk. There's, you guys were at Mississippi State in 1968 and all this stuff. Yeah, I was 17, 18 years old, but I grew up in the 50s. Totally different situation. In a lot of sense, pre-civil rights era. Okay, so we knew about the segregated South. I grew up on a farm. We raised just about every kind of animal you could think of. And somewhere along the line, my dad decided he wanted to open up a service station. He went by one Saturday morning, we were riding around in Brookhaven, and there were these two houses that burned down. And he said, and it may not happen exactly like this, but he says, I'm gonna build a service station right there. I'm 10 years old. I said, okay, whatever. Long story short, he built it. That helped provide me some funds and interactions with people that did not look like me, because not a lot, but some of the customers were white. And so when it got time to go to college, remember the ACT test? Everybody remember that? You had to fill out the places where you go. That's probably foreign language to some of you. But you had to put down 3 colleges where you were going to go. So I knew Alcorn very well, knew Jackson State very well. And I said, oh yeah, that's right. We went to Mississippi State, I think it was last year or something like that. I'm gonna put down MSU. I did not put down race on my ACT form. Now, did that have an impact? We'll never know. But the fact is, I didn't. I got to Mississippi State. Over a half a century later, here I am.
Wow. Well, like Robert mentioned, I was born and raised in Starkville, right over the hill. As a matter of fact, on Spring Street, if I sit on the front porch of my mom's house, I can see the rim of the football stadium. And on Saturday evenings, I recall hearing the crowd and the cowbells, but I knew nothing about this place. And if you know about, or the history about Needmore, or Needmore as we call it, then you would understand that it was a segregated community. And so I spent my first 18 years in a segregated community. Knew nothing about the university. And there's some reasons for that. As Robert has alluded to, you grew up in a time of the civil rights movement, voting rights, social upheaval. And even though you would hear about things going on in other cities, rioting and burning and all those kinds of things, you can imagine the mindset of a single parent with 5 or 6 kids, 2 of them already in college, and here comes along a 3rd one saying that he wants to go to college. The Vietnam War was raging, and for 18-year-olds, registering for the draft was one of the biggest anxieties anyone could ever have. And especially in your community when there were deceased soldiers coming home that lived in your community. And so the last thing I wanted was to be drafted. And my mom told me, Harvest, I can't afford to send you to college because you got a brother and sister. One's at Alcorn, one's at Mississippi Valley. I can't send you anywhere. So I applied to come to here. And we had baccalaureate back then on a Sunday afternoon at Henderson High School. Monday morning, I was sitting on this campus in a college algebra class. That's how I went here.
Well, I'm Doug Milton, and I grew up in Laurel, Jones County, Mississippi. And most people, when they hear Laurel, I mean, even the state of Maine, you talk about Laurel, everyone knows about Hometown, the television show. And Laurel, 1967, was not a nice place to live. My parents were very active in the civil rights movement. In 1965, they sent me over to Mary Holmes, at the time Mary Holmes Junior College, for Mary Holmes Summer Enrichment Program. This is a program for kids who are about to integrate the schools under freedom of choice, because the schools were not integrated, but under freedom of choice, to help bring you up to the standard, or to a standard that you could at least compete. Because, I mean, separate but equal was really separate, and so unequal was not even funny. And you guys have probably heard the stories about the books that got passed down from the white schools that we got that were marked through and so forth. So in 1967, under freedom of choice, I enrolled at Laurel High School, and there were 24 of us, and 2 were my siblings, so there's 3 Miltons up there. But anyway, started school, was not receptive. I mean, people were not friendly. And again, let's look at Laurel in perspective. Jones County had the largest per capita population of Klansmen than any place else in the United States. The 3 civil rights guys that were killed in Philadelphia, the people who did it came from my hometown. When they killed Vernon White, they came from my hometown. Sam Bowers, there was Nicks, and that ilk. And so that was the environment I entered the school system. But I was a little, I guess you would say, a little kooky, and I was a good fighter. So whenever someone picked a fight with me, it was not that I was just fighting, I would just beat them bad. Make an example out of them. And I had always a rowdy spirit about me, but I was an excellent student. And so being a good student, and I participated a lot in things in high school, even musicals, and my wife still jokes me about participating in those musicals. But anyway, there were 2 guys on our school board, and these names may sound familiar to you. One was W. Billy Howard. Before he became a millionaire, he started Howard Industries down in Laurel, and the other was Joe Frank Sanderson, who was the father of Sanderson Farms Chicken. But both of them had gone to Mississippi State. And they were not rich guys at the time, but they encouraged me to come to state. And back then I had a brother who was at the University of Illinois, a sister who was at the W, and another sister at Bishop College in Dallas, Texas. I was the 4th one going off to college. And I came here, and what I realized when I got here, people like Robert Harvest, they were so receptive. It's like you had a whole new family when you got here. When I got here, I think there were 36 black people when I came, total. But it was like a small family that opened and told you everything you needed to know. They looked out for you. And if you were sitting down at that big witch table with the class, when the chime at the chapel went out, they would encourage you to go to class. But some of us was just, no, this hand is just too good. This hand is too good. And then I left and went out to the military, but at the same time I started dating this one, and the rest is history.
What to say? I grew up right here in Scotland, just a handful of miles from this university. My life was probably typical of a young black girl's life during that period. I was born in 1954. I lived at 138 Long Street. You'll remember that address. I always use it, 138 Long Street. Despite the fact that it's just a handful of miles away, it was light years away from this university. My experience with this school was actually limited to the people in the neighborhood who were employed by the university, because they were the cleaning people, they were the lab technicians, there were people who worked, some in the labs, some with the chickens, some with other things. But they wore uniforms with their names, and more importantly, the name of the college at the time. So the college was a big mystery in my neighborhood, but there was something very positive about the college. We got a lot of food from this university. Everybody marvels at the cheese, and they line up for the Edam cheese and all of that. We were fortunate enough to have many of my neighbors who worked out here, so I could taste some of the best cheese before I was 10 years old. But my point in saying that is that we were very poor. So this food, eggs, chickens, all of the things that the university offered were supplemental to the things that were grown here in the county. So that's how I was introduced. I went to the, quote, Henderson Complex, the black schools. I started there in 1960. One of my dearest friends, with whom I've been best friends since first grade, happens to be here today. But she and I started first grade in 1960. We stayed there going from Henderson, the elementary school, the place of the one cafeteria that serviced the high school, the middle school, and the elementary school. And oh, by the way, if there were too many students in line, you stood outside to wait to get your food so it was soaking wet during the rain to go inside. And those were the experiences that we had. But it was an environment where we had committed educators. I was very fortunate. I learned an awful lot. But I also understood through my parents, my mother, my Aunt Adelaide, and my Uncle Pose, that life could and should be better for all of us. To that end, my aunt, Adelaide Elliott, who did come to school out here, worked very hard. Boycotts, marches. Yes, I was jailed with many other young children, and I don't remember the year, but jailed for walking on public streets. But anyway, made it through all of that. Wonderful memories. We had a collegial environment there until 1970. The court decided finally all of the skirting around desegregation was going to end. So that ended, but some very, very life-changing things happened at that point. While we had embraced and loved the Henderson complex and the old school, which had actually been there since my mother went to school there, was burned down mysteriously during the summer. Our school records ended up in the dumpster as they prepared for the integration. Because remember, now they had to get that building, which had been fine for the black children in the community, ready for the white children to go to school there. So all of our things were thrown out. It was as if we walked along, life was pretty good, and all of a sudden, that part of our life was shut. We were going to a building we'd never entered before. Walked into a building, I don't remember that anybody really showed you where anything was, but I do know this. For the first time in my life, I went to a school where they actually had notebooks, not the ones that were sold at Fred's Dollar Store, which only allowed for one subject and a handful of pages. Life was very different, so we were introduced to a lot of different things. We also lost a lot. Many of us had participated in extracurricular activities. We were forced to, I guess the term is, go out again for things that we had. And many times black children were not selected to be on whatever team. However, the classroom was an interesting place to be. At the time, I don't know how many people are familiar with the term tracking. Well, it's where they kind of label children, and you're kind of placed on these tracks. And they typically go from A to D, depending on the number of children in the grade, and what they think of your intelligence level, and what you can learn. More times than not, the first two sections were reserved for white students, with a couple of black students. That is the way the school is set up. And the children from C through B and maybe E and F got very little attention academically. Fortunately, again, because of this university, because many of the spouses worked in the school system in Starkville, we ended up with some very, very good instruction. Not often able to participate in the class, but a lot of exposure to new and different things from an academic perspective. So all of that was great, you know, we're just working along, and all of a sudden, it gets to be our senior year. For me, my dearest friends decided to graduate early and left me at Starkville High School. So I did, and it was a sad time, it was pretty traumatic, but so many of them came to Mississippi State University. That became fortuitous for me because it made my decision to come to Mississippi State very easy. I had them, I had some of the children who were white who did decide to come to school, so I had study groups set up. Life was going to be good for me. came to Mississippi State, majored in ed psych, had to change that. That was not a wise thing to do. I found him along the way. We were married at the end of 1972. He was living in Florida. I joined him in Florida in early 73. And finally, we went down, and of course, I went with a heavy heart. Because one of the things that my aunt, my uncle, and my mother had always pushed was that I would have a degree. So we went to Florida, life was good, had a baby, life was good for 3 at that point, got that little girl, brought her back to Mississippi State, we came back in 1976, had a pretty good time, I think, and signed up for ROTC. We were commissioned here. We were actually in the first class that was commissioned as a part of the graduation ceremony at the Coliseum. That's it.
Hello. Hello? Hello. I wonder what you hear. I grew up in Greenville, Mississippi. At that particular time, it was a beautiful city. It was really beautiful. Great mentors. The blacks in this place were educators. Blacks in this place were professionals. So I grew up around all these people. And the high school that I went to was Coleman High. And the community was really built around Coleman High because everybody in Greenville had attended Coleman. The principal from Coleman was an alumni from Morehouse. So he brought in all the stuff from Morehouse and then put it into Coleman. He brought the colors, he brought the tigers, he brought everything from Morehouse to Coleman. And he ran it by the rules. He was strict with it. At home, my mother had taught school when she was 17 years old. My father was a postal clerk. He had worked on the city of New Orleans, which ran from Chicago to New Orleans. But the blacks on the car for the post office had to get off at Memphis. They couldn't go from Memphis down to New Orleans. So therefore, I saw him periodically. Sometimes I saw him. But I had a brother and a sister. My brother graduated valedictorian. My sister graduated salutatorian. So I was trying to figure out where I'm going to fit in at. I can't do that. I have another sister behind me. But she graduated from Mississippi State. But the thing was, I ran track. The guy put a lot of time in me, and I worked hard. And they called me Super Chicken. I was super. And I thought I was super. You couldn't tell me nothing when I got on that track. But we had put in applications to run at Delta State. We were ready to go to Delta State because we had won, 2 state championships. We were trying to go to the 3rd one. We wanted to go to Delta State and run, but it came up before the track meet. They sent us a letter saying that the Magnolia couldn't run against the Mississippi high school. So okay, we got that. We wanted to run it to the Jackson Daily News relays. They wouldn't let us come. So we had to go to the Pelican relays down in New Orleans to find out who we were. And when we went there, Coach didn't tell us that we were running against the best team in the nation, which was Austin Anderson. And they let us know that we wouldn't, They let us know how it worked. But as I continued to go, in about 1970, 70 years ago, Brown versus Education came up to say that, came up to tell us that that segregation wasn't, it was unconstitutional. Now, 70 years ago, I was 1 year old then. Now, 18 years after that, we integrated schools in Greenville, Mississippi. All of that time it took to integrate the schools. I went to Greenville High. I never had a conversation with anyone white. I would see you, hey, something like that, or you would go into a store. But just to have a conversation, nah, that didn't happen. I had never heard of Mississippi State. I heard of Ole Miss due to the fact they were talking about Archie Hoop. So I heard of Ole Miss. But as I was laying on the ground, Coach Hunt came over and said to me, he said, "Who Vernon White?" I said, "Me." So I said, "What you want?" So he said, "I want to talk to you." I said, "Well, okay." So he was telling me, "I want you to come to Mississippi State." Well, what is Mississippi State? So he went to explain to me what Mississippi State was. So I said, okay. So he couldn't talk to me that much, so I went back to school, and I was sitting out, and one of the coaches came over there pulling my collar. He said, Vernon, where you going to school at? Before then, when we got to desegregated school, all our coaches at Coleman had been demoted to assistant coaches, and all the white coaches were head coaches. So the coaches at our school decided that I'm not going to coach. If I'm not going to get that position, I'm not going to coach. So all of them bagged off, and just so happened, Coach Weatherby got the position as head coach over to Valley. And all of them were going to Valley. All of them did go to Valley and work for a moment. So, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, all my guys, we going to Valley, gonna make Valley out of Coleman. We're gonna run this way. My talk. So the guy asked me where I was going. I said, I'm going to Valley, man. He said, okay. He got up and left, and about 15 minutes later, he said, hey, Vern, come out. I said, what, man? He said, somebody wants you on the telephone. So I went to the telephone, and it was Coach Hunt again. How you doing? I'm great, man. I'm great. So he said, I'd like to come and take you to dinner. Me? He said, I said, man, the only way I can go to dinner with you, my mama got to go, man. But I wasn't going nowhere like that. I just wasn't doing that. But mama, you know, mama protected. So then we went to dinner. Had a nice conversation and stuff. And so after that, a little while later, he invited us up here to come up here as a crew. So my brother, my sister, my mother, and my father, we came up here. And they showed us all around, showed me back out the hall, the plush carpet, and the telephone in the room. And stuff. Oh, look at that. So it was really nice. Took us over to the old lane to eat, and we had dinner and everything. So he took me back over to the old gym. So I'm sitting there, and he had my name up there on the board and stuff to come to Mississippi State. So he's sitting there talking, and he said, Mr. and Mrs. White, I'm offering your son a 4-year scholarship. You won't have to pay a penny for 4 years. I'm taking care of tuition, books, everything. You won't have to pay a penny. So my mother and father looked at me, I looked at them, so they said, what you gonna do? I said, I think I'm gonna wait. Wait for what? What you waiting for? So my brother had graduated from Jackson, and he took me outside, and we talked. He talked me down and said, man, look here. You're the first black that they want there. You could go in there and you can do something, man. He said, I believe in you. So that's all he had to say to me, and I came back in and signed the scholarship. I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea. But I tell you this, that's the best decision they ever made for me. Thank you.
Jessica, I think next we're supposed to talk about our time at Mississippi State, right? Can you imagine? No, you can't because you weren't alive, at least most of them. Fall of 1968. A little black boy from Brookhaven, Mississippi. I'd only been to Mississippi State campus one time. And we really didn't have a good experience except that we won and what it was taken from us because we don't exactly go by points. My mom and dad, and I'm an only child, by the way. So they're one and only child of Robert and Lucretia Barnes, graduated salutatorian from an all-black high school. I mean, that was Mr. Everything. A big fish in a little pond, right? You know, prominent family, blah, 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 blah. Mississippi State, in that Sunday evening, walk on campus. And there's a picture, I think, in this book here of me and my mom. We're on page 17. Dropped me off on campus. And I wasn't really homesick, at least for about 2 minutes. I didn't really know what to expect. And somehow my roommate was Arnold Townsend, and he was black. And I found out that the Christ Hall Second floor, right above me was 2 other black students. And then I found out in the next dorm, same situation, so all the blacks were put in at the same place in the boomerang, called the boomerang dorms right there. So back Sunday, I was just unpacking, didn't know what to do. Back in the day, there were no computers. The registration was, I don't know what it was. Nightmare. That's the word I was looking for, nightmare. So lo and behold, I ran across a few other black students. And Harvard may have been one of them. Doug wasn't here yet. And so it took them more than a week to register. But I ran into someone that says that, there's a lot of black students at the YMCA. It had nothing to do with the building. It had nothing to do with the YMCA per se. It had to do with the fact that Harvest was there, and Jerry Randolph was there, and Eddie Washington was there. And we found a community. Now, community is not always just people who look like you, or act like you, or have the same culture. A community is people that you feel comfortable with, okay? Matter of fact, there's a book I read, it's called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting at the Same Table in the Cafeteria? When I first looked at that book, and I actually read it just, I don't know, a little over a year or so ago, I thought it was about psychology, psychological being with people that look like you. It's not about that at all. It's a sociological book because it's talking about being comfortable in uncomfortable places. When we sat down in the classroom, I sat down right here. There was never a white person sat right to the left or to the right. If the classroom was full, because some of these classrooms, they're fairly small. Someone would move, somebody would stand up. Even in one of the bigger classrooms, the big auditorium, no one that looked like you, didn't look like you, sat beside you. And we just got almost the expectation. Very seldom of us, maybe as I got to be a senior, there was only 1 or 2 black people in a class. Most classes, there was only 1 black person in that class. So as soon as class was over with, I went to the YMCA building. I could have a conversation with people. So we found our community there. There's a lot more I could say. One more thing, one more picture, then I'm going to pass it on to Harvard. See this guy right there on the right end? He's not just a light-skinned white person. He is a white professor, a good friend of ours. His name is Dr. Wallace Murphy. And Gloria, stand up, Gloria. Gloria is not in this picture, but she's a good friend of Wallace. Wallace was the advisor of the Afro-American Plus. Well, geez, why would you have a white advisor of the Afro-American Plus? There were no black professors at Mississippi State in 1968. I have to pause there because to a lot of you and to a lot of children and grandchildren, they're like, really? Yes, really. Go ahead.
Can you explain to the audience what the Afro-American Plus was?
It was the first black organization at Mississippi State. It came out of the fact that when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated in April of 1968, the black student says, we need to bind together. And I didn't get here till the fall, but that was the place to be, that was the organization to belong. So, I'm tagged, playing tag.
What's the plus?
The plus is, when the AA Plus, the Afro-American Plus was founded, you could not have an organization that excluded anyone, quote unquote. So we had to say, oh, okay, how are we going to figure this out? Well, we just call it Plus. There were pluses along the way, but they were minor pluses, if that makes sense.
I can ditto to much of what Robert has said. The environment here was totally strange to me, despite the fact that you could, I suppose if you could climb to the top of the football stadium and look west, you could see my mom's house from there. But I'd never come to campus. I had no sense of what it was like growing up and living in a totally segregated environment. So you can imagine the cultural change that I had to figure out in arriving at campus. I had mentioned that a high school had baccalaureate on a Sunday afternoon. And the next morning, I came to campus, and I was very fortunate because there was a student attending here that lived down on the end of Spring Street at the corner of Spring and Gillespie. His name was Harold Williams. Anybody remember Harold?
Okay, I remember that.
And actually, I credit him for encouraging me to come to Mississippi State. Because I asked him, what's it like there? He says, you'll be all right. Yeah, fine. But the nightmare I experienced in just coming to campus, and if it wasn't for him, I don't think I could have figured out how to register that college algebra class that I took. Because the registration occurred in the cow barn. And there was sawdust on the floor, and they had the auditorium all around, and down on the floor were where departments had set up tables with class cards. And you had to wave into that to select a class with your card in hand. You walked through where the registrar was, and you signed off and got your bill or whatever it was that you did, and you're in class. And so my first day on class, on campus, going to class was a Monday morning really early, 7 a.m. Harold and I walked from Spring Street down along Gillespie until we got to campus. And he says, do you know where to go? I remember this distinctly. He says, I said, no. He says, come with me. We went to the YMCA building.
Wow.
And there you saw other black students, you go, wow. And I remember, I'm going to remember in a minute. Not Kelvin. Eddie Bell says, what class you got? And I said, college algebra. He says, you're probably in McCain. I said, yeah. He says, McCain 112. I says, yeah. He says, okay, I know where it is. He walked me to class.
That's it.
And the class was standing room only. It was full. And you have to imagine, it's a summer class, and probably the only section being off. Mrs. Rosemond was the instructor. She was left-handed. She wrote fast. She talked even faster. But just to give you a sense of the transition I was seeking to make, I sat in the second seat in the middle. And like Robert had already mentioned, at least 2 seats around you were empty. And there were students standing along the wall. And I remember her giving instructions. There are seats up here. You can come and sit right here. Come and sit down, so I need to get started. And I had so much anxiety, folks. I remember this distinctly. Sitting on the edge of my chair, my left leg sticking out. I thought I knew algebra, right? And so I'm trying to keep up, and my left leg is shaking like you would not believe. So much so I had to kind of catch myself. And we talk about mental health of students these days. I think we had some really great challenges as students back then. But you know what? I was a good student. I learned to study. I learned to learn. I was telling you about one of those times when they had stacks that students had access to in this building. I was in there studying. And one night, I fell asleep. I woke up about 2 a.m. and the library was closed. I almost panicked. But I discovered when you got to the front door, all you need to do is push and you go open. So I went back and stayed a couple more hours. Went back over to this building because at that time I had a work-study job. And part of the work-study job required you have a space to stay in. And so I went back to my space over there, slept another hour or two, got up, with the class. And in many senses, I practically moved in for 9 years. I just stayed the whole time. And there are lots of stories to tell in between, but I'm kind of looking out there and I see Han Lab and say, so close, why don't they build a corridor or something?
I mean, well, when I came in this, August 1970, and from my high school, there were like 9 of us, 9 students. I was only black who came from my high school. George Miller had come from Oak Park, so 2 of us from Laurel, 2 blacks from Laurel, but the rest. So I knew these kids who had come. So when I first got here, I would say probably the first month, I did have more association with the white kids that I had come from school with than I did with the black students. But then I noticed the why one day. I said, what's going on over there with those colored people? No. So I went over to visit, and it was like, your people. And like I said, it was Robert and Eddie and Jim Phillips and Randall, just these people who made you feel welcome, like you were a member of the family, you know. They told you everything you need to do, you know, about where not to park, because I had a car here. And I was getting a ticket every other day. So they taught me the ropes about where to park, where not to park, and everything. And just opened up like, you know, a brotherhood and sisterhood. And Gloria was over there, and you remember Mary Douglas, right? Yeah, and just a lot of people that made you feel welcome. And I would go to class, and I was, again, a pretty good student. And then I knew how to play space before I got here. Then I learned how to play dead. And that was probably the worst habit I ever picked up. Because I would be sitting over there, and I turned out to be a pretty decent player. And
No, you weren't.
yes, I still tell her I'm the best. Nobody, even to this day. You just played with me. I made you good. Right, so we won the game we played against Ambrose's son. These old guys showed his son a lesson or two. But anyway, and I also made sure you studied because you knew what was going to happen to you. And also the professors who the boy and who to go to. Now, I was just the opposite. When I went into the classroom, I always sat down front. And because I wanted the teacher to know, because that's what I had done in high school, I want you to know I was there. And you're not going to ignore me, because I'm going to be a pain in your butt. And I think everyone will tell you, I can be a really big pain in the butt. Big time. But the brotherhood and the sisterhood that was here, and the friendships that I was actually, because Robert and I have been friends, and this one came along until my second half of when I came back. But I mean, we just became best of buddies, and we still are to this day. And Vern was an incredible track. I mean, he didn't give him the credit. This guy could fly. I mean, he only weighed about 120 pounds. Yeah, and he could fly. And again, Robert, Harvest, Eddie, those guys were mentors. And then time passed, and I ended up going to the military in 1972 after I started in Milton in 71. Then went off and came back, and it was like another chapter, but it was kind of like we never left because Milton was from Starkville. And we lived near Destin, down in Florida. And so it was only a 5-hour drive, so we never missed football games, we never missed holidays, and some of the people here thought I was here for 9 years, continuously, because they never thought I left. But we came back in 76, and that was another chapter, and it was almost like a different world, because we had established ourselves as students, but now we have to grow and look, and make a foundation for the people coming next. And we had administrators that were not nice. And I won't call them the name, but there were some bastards. And I'll use that term. And it's not loosely. But they tried to do everything they could to inhibit us from being successful. And so I got into a lot of contests. And Linda says, my vocabulary is not appropriate, I use those bad words. And so I would insult them and say things to them, and they would say, okay, you suspended, you expelled, boom, you have to go over. And so I would go over to, and at the time, J.D. McComas was the president. The best thing that ever happened in Mississippi State. And so he would say, Doug, you need to settle down. You can't do that. And finally, one day, I don't know, it's maybe third or fourth suspension, I don't know which one it was. But he said, I need to find a way to channel all that energy you have. And so he put me on every committee that he could find for a student representative. I had so many committees I could get into trouble, but the best one that he did was the Affirmative Action Compliance Committee. And this was, we're going to go out and find some black people to teach and work at this university. And he was totally dedicated. And I always say that's the reason he's not here today, because he's still hiring these black people, bringing them in. But I was able to work in a capacity with the university president as a Raleigh student to help grow and improve this university. You know, for the good of the students, for the good of the state, for the good of the school. Just a little sidebar there. He left here and went to Ohio University, and we stayed in contact as friends. I mean, this is the guy who was president of the university, and I was a little Raleigh student. Then he came to Virginia Tech years later, and my daughter, the one that came back here in 79, 76, he knew us and, you know, exchanged Christmas cards and all these years. And so he called me one day, she was graduating, he said, hey, where's Nikki going to college? And he said, well, she's going to Rutgers. And we were living in Washington at the time. And he said, well, I was looking at Virginia Tech. And again, at the time, and Ambrose knows this, in Fairfax County, some of the best school systems in the nation, and most of the students that do well, they go to Virginia schools because Virginia schools do so well academically. And so she didn't want to go, she called it sub-school 5 or 6, a continuation of her high school. So she didn't want to go to school in Virginia. So he said, well, hey, why don't you have her come down and visit with me? And so she went down to visit with him, and he convinced her to go to Virginia Tech. But the thing was, he remembered she was my daughter. So he kept a close eye on her, and she always ended up saying, why did you let me go down there? but so Mississippi State is near and dear to my heart, you know, from that time, from being a Raleigh student to becoming that person who can make a contribution to the university, make it better for the students who come here today and the faculty.
Well, we alluded to this earlier. I came to Mississippi State a single woman in August of 1972. I created a safe place for myself without even thinking about it. I had my friends who graduated a year early. They were already here waiting for me. And I had some former classmates who were here. So I had my study groups. I had just a ready resource for anything that I needed. The year before we graduated, my friend Janice, who was here, was old enough to have her license. So Janice would take us out on Sunday evenings, and one of the places we would visit was Mississippi State. So we also had friends who were in their classes that we were friends with. So 1972 wasn't tough for me to come to school. So I came to school, and one of the first things that happened, everybody signs up for English composition. I have no idea what it's called today. I didn't realize there were two. Yeah, I didn't realize there was a basic and I guess a regular English, first semester English comp. So I went to my first class, and they asked us to write something. So I wrote. I went back to the class, I think it was 3 days a week. I went back the next day, and the instructor said, I'm going to call your name, and you're going to go to another class. My name was called. I was like, whatever, this is the time I meet this class. Where are they talking about? Turns out that virtually everybody who got up in that class, everybody who got to stay, everybody who stayed was a non-black person except me. So wait, let me back it up. I wanted to be a basic intro, just go in there, do my little job. Well, what they discovered was they had mixed skill levels. So everybody who was black ended up in a, quote, basic intro class. So it was a little bit more like tracking still. And that was my first disappointment at this school. It all worked out, and now that I'm almost 70 years old, I get why. And this goes back to Starkville High School. My English teacher, who was a lovely woman, had a husband who worked at the university out here, who was a professor. Same profession. So she taught pretty much the way he taught. And I did write very well because I was fortunate enough to have her, but I do want to tell you a little story about her. She would not, there were only 3 black people in the class. She would never call on us. We'd raise our hands, she wouldn't call. So finally my mother, who didn't want to take any time off work, called the school and said, what's going on? Why won't you call on my daughter? Do you know why she wouldn't call on us? She was afraid we wouldn't know the answer. But my point is, despite that little rough edge in English, it helped in the end when I got to Mississippi State. Did well at Mississippi State. 1972 was a turning point for this university, and I don't know if you all know this, the history of special services. It was started by Dr. Morris Kinsey. And it was designed to provide assistance. Some of the things we're talking about, Harvest was talking about. Not knowing where to sign up to go to classes, not understanding, in my case, the difference between basic composition versus something more advanced, which was called something different. Just those nuances about going to college that many black children had never been exposed to. So he started this. It was wildly successful. 1972 was the first year for this program. So we were in our dorm on a Sunday evening, and all of the black people got up to leave. We said, hey, where are you guys going? I have another good friend who lives here still. And I said, where are you guys going? They said, oh, we have a meeting. We were also black. We're like, what kind of meeting? I said, didn't you get invited? They're like, no. Who invited you? Oh, there's a group over there. They had invited all the black people. We were like, what are we? So we said, do you think they'd mind if we came to the meeting? Just to see. Turns out, they extended invitations to, I guess, all the black people, black freshmen they thought were here, and we were just not included. So it was a ready resource, tutoring, talking, guiding, providing some encouragement when you need it. Oh, it was just a wonderful program. So we signed up. We didn't know what we were signing up for, but we did sign up because for the same reason that Robert mentioned, there was community at the Y, there was community in special services as well. So we signed up for that, but I was on work study. I mentioned that I grew up very poor, so of course I couldn't go to college without working. So we signed up, everybody signed up for work study. Most black children at that point worked in the cafeteria, might work in the bakery, work in a lab. 9 times out of 10, you did not work in an office. So you'd have a cursory interview, a little typing test, and they'd say, oh, we'll call you. Of course, they never called. So thanks to Dr. Kinsey, one of my dearest friends and I were hired to work for Afro-American Plus. They funded the positions. So just another way where our community supported each other. So we ended up working there. That's where I got to meet people who were upper class and big time for us as freshmen. But that was my start. When I came back, when I was here, I majored in ed psych because I wanted to help everybody. When I came back in 1976, my perspective was markedly different. For anybody who wants and who dares to do anything in that field, there's a lot of education ahead, a lot of expense, and money is delayed. You don't make money right away. So I changed after I had a very tough summer course. When I got back, I decided I was going to change to the School of Business. I went to the School of Business, never looked back. I ended up with an amazing advisor, Dr. Louis Eversole. He was a wonderful man. On paper, you would never put us together, but it was a match made in heaven. In 1978 here, I was inducted in a Phi Kappa Phi, and I can't remember the year, maybe 1977, another organization which I'm sure no longer exists for married women and honors fraternal society here at the university. So had a good time both times, but there were little flips along the way.
Unfortunately, Vernon, we took most of your time. So what time we got, Jessica?
We're okay.
Okay.
We're not gonna
Okay,
talk.
all right. Well, he's the track star, he's the track.
As I said before, you gotta remember I grew up in this all-black neighborhood. The coaches have been my coach ever since I was, 12, 13 years old. And for me to come to get 19, 18 years old and decide I'm not gonna go with you, I'm going to a white school. So ordinarily, I was a sellout. You go home, man, you're a sellout. And so you have to take that. But here I am, I thought I was super. I'm away from home, I got $20 in my pocket, I got my own room, a telephone, and all these girls in the track. I'm in heaven, So, like she said, I took the classes, yeah, come on, laugh at me now, I'm serious. But I took the classes that I needed to take. And like I was listening to him a minute ago, and he said something about somebody remembered him. I went to the track. And I always tell anybody, you didn't have to necessarily respect me, but you're going to respect this performance because I'm going to put something on you. That's how I came through there. I'm going to put something on you. I had a very good freshman year. When I came in, Dale Gibson won the Nationals in the 600, and he and I was the only one that placed in the SEC at that time. And I had a very good year. Come back sophomore year, I had a good year. And see, the thing about it, I always have to tell you about that Magnificent Seven. Late Robert Bell, late Frank Dowden, late Melvin Barkham, the late Larry Fry, Jerry Jenkins, Smith, James Smith, and myself. They was bringing us in here 2 by 2. But just so happened, the one that I was supposed to come in, he didn't come. So they left me down on the end by myself. So this guy, another guy they brought in with me, so I'm the only one that was the white guy. But we were cool, he was real cool. I messed around one day, we went over to the white, and I looked up, he come over, the guy on one of my shirts. I said, okay, we gotta be real cool. But all in all, it was a blessing. It truly was a blessing. I learned so much here. And like I say, I didn't just come up here because I wanted to come. As they said, they came because they wanted to come. I was asked to come. So that's totally different. Living over there in the dormitory, you got a hot meal every morning. Wake you up to go eat breakfast. You wake up, they washing your basin off. They in there with your carpet, vacuuming your carpet, emptying your trash can. 12 o'clock, you got a meal there, all cooked. In the evening, you got a meal, 3 meals right there, and even at night at 10 o'clock, they tell you come down, eat again. So, it was wonderful. Everybody, snack. Everybody always asked me, how was I treated? I was treated like a king, man. It was cool, man. So, I put in the work now, don't get me wrong, I put in the work. And as I say, putting in the work, I went and got other brothers. Like he said, they remember you from the impact that you make. And I made an impact, and they remember me, and they respect me. And matter of fact, in 1975, I had recruited some guys, and we came in here. And we still together this day. We came in 1975, we finished second in the SEC, and that was to Tennessee, and Tennessee was national champion. I had gone and got some guys and, bought hamburgers and fries and fish and chicken and stuff, and they believe in cold soup. They believe in soup. Super chicken, that's my guy. So we came in there and we did a good job. And like I say, Hail State.
Q&A? Well, this may come up, I have to say this, I've been thinking about this for a long time. When Horace and I was sitting in the library, the Ulysses S. Grant Library. Just think about that now. Who was the second person, this is the last page, the second person down below? That's me on the top, by the way. It's Stephen D. Lee. Who did Stephen D. Lee fight for? Confederacy. Ulysses said, this is not a history test, but everybody knows this now. Who did Grant fight for? The Union. What a juxtaposition, what a paradox, what a parallel, I don't know what to call it, at Mississippi State. That's who we are. Yeah, that's the environment that we grew up in. We had the best of times, and what the next part, and the worst of times, right here on this campus. Q&A. Q&A. Thank you, Chief, for coming by. That's the Chief for me. Y'all want to say hello to the Chief? Hail to the Hail to the Anyone?
Before you guys get into the Q&A, just if you don't mind, if you as the pioneers, if y'all are willing to tell us just a little bit about y'all's professional career, if you don't mind.
You don't want to stop long, is it?
Just a little bit.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I go first this time.
Yeah.
Well, I coached. I did a lot of coaching. I started out with baseball, I had girl basketball. Ooh, I hate that. But I had a girls basketball team. I coached football and track. All of this came about me at various schools. Also, so when I got to Texas for a moment. So when I went out to Texas, I started working with Project C, Structural Environment for the Motion Disturbed. I didn't know nothing about that field, but I started working with that program. After that, when I went down to Gulfport, they put me in, I was expelled again. But I started taking courses over the years to be certified every year. So I started teaching what SLDs and stuff, and I've learned to work with special education. One of the best, one of the rewarding things. So I kept going. And then I ran across early childhood development. 3 and 4-year-olds. Never thought I could do that. But I loved that. About a year ago, I stopped doing that because they funded a program in Jackson and they gave the money to the police department, so they had to give me another job. So what, they sent me to the police department. But my love for teaching and taking them children, man, and see them learn and play, man, I could, child at heart too. We had a good time. And that would have been my life, man, in education.
I spent 4 years on active duty as a second lieutenant. We were stationed in Washington, which at the time was very rare for such junior officers. So I was pretty sure the Air Force was not my future. So my initial thought was that I'd go to law school. But then I figured out the level of commitment I'd have to the government after I left law school, and I said, that's just not going to work. So at one point, we decided it was time to have our second child, and I would in fact resign my commission. I resigned my commission and went into the aerospace industry. I spent over 35 years in that industry. I worked for Raytheon. I worked for Argonne ST, which was a much smaller company, but doing similar things, delivering amazing communications products to people that you will never know. But it was very exciting. I ended my career at my best position, and we were acquired by Boeing in the end, and that's it.
We were commissioned together with Washington, and one of the things we like to joke about, Washington is a powerhouse of military leadership. And we were assigned to Bolin Air Force Base, and that's where all the generals lived. And they have a club, the officers club there, and of course having that many 4-star, 3-star, 2-star generals there. And it was a joke, and because there was a parking space at the club right next to the 4-star generals, and it says any second lieutenant Because it was a joke. No second lieutenant existed in Washington. All of a sudden they had two. And as a matter of fact, everyone on Bolton Air Force Base called us the lieutenants. It was not Lieutenant Milton, it was the lieutenants. And I was working on OSI Office of Special Investigations. And again, I was only going to spend 4 years. And as I was on terminal leave. Linda was out, and I was going to go work for Sonny Montgomery down on the Hill. And they came to me and said, Doug was doing this program over the Joint Staff. Think you'll be right for it? And they said, can you give us a year? So I went home and talked to Linda. I said, yeah, I can do 1 year. Then I left to another year, and then I left another year. Then I got selected 4 years ago. I was on the major, and they were going to send me to Intermediate Service School down in Norfolk, Virginia. So I was doing like a PCS, and so she said no. And so I resigned my commission. They went into the reserve. So I spent the rest of my time on the Joint Staff as a reservist. In the meantime, I went to work for EDS, Electronic Data System.
There's a Mississippi State alumni story in that whole process.
Oh, stop.
No, you can
Okay.
tell it.
But anyway, I won't do that.
Okay.
Okay, but anyway, I went to work for EDS as a recruiter initially. And when I went to work there, we lived in a place called Burke, and we had to cross the Cabin John Bridge to get into Bethesda, where my office was. It was only like 17 miles, but it was almost a 2-hour commute. And so an opportunity came open for me in Richmond, and I could commute to Richmond, which was 100 miles away, quicker than I could to my office, which was 17 miles away. And so I said, I can do this. And so after the first week, man, this is a hard drive. And so they ended up giving me an apartment down there. But I would still come home. And so we acquired a couple of companies. We were building a building. And one of the companies we acquired, the president of that company had Confederate stuff all over his office. And that just did not sit right with me. And being who Doug Milton is, I had to figure out something. And and it was awful. I kind of set him up to fail when I could, and he was astounded. He was like, he couldn't defend himself. And I worked for a guy, his name was George Newstrom at the time, who was just tough. I know, no time, I know. See what she does to me? And so this guy, he settled down one day, this guy couldn't defend himself, so he was fired on the spot, and that's what George was. So he said, you're running this. Everything. So I ended up running everything from Richmond. And then it came to a point, and George says, hey, Doug, I want to see you in North Carolina to run this business. And I knew she was not going to let me go. So I left and went to work for American Petroleum Institute to build a company, and I did that. And that's how I actually ended up in Maine. So I worked for them for EDS for 17 years. Retired from them, and then went to work for Parole Systems, which is a company that Ross Perot started after he sold EDS to General Motors. And I spent until 2007 with Parole Systems, retired, and became grandparents.
I'll be brief. Here's a story I must relate to you. And it reflects the quality of this institution. Any chemistry majors in the audience? Just kind of quickly give me a hand like that. Oh, bless your heart. That's awesome. You can imagine the amount of work that you put in to earn any degree here, but to earn a technical degree or to earn a degree in chemistry requires very significant commitment. And so you work pretty hard if you want to do well at it. One story I must relate to you, I was completing my PhD, and one of the requirements, of course, was doing research and writing a dissertation. I didn't have the typewriter, and so I asked permission from the folks in the chemistry department office if I could please use the electric typewriters in the office during lunchtime or after work. And they agreed to allow me to do that. And so, very near, I was done with all the requirements. I had just needed to clean up my dissertation and get it submitted. So I would go down to the department office at lunchtime to make corrections and type those 300 letters that I needed to send to academic institutions around the country in order to nail down an academic position somewhere. So I was in the process of doing that. One day, I came down from my little office and was walking down first floor where the chemistry department office was. And this tall white gentleman was just coming in the door, and he was walking and looking left and looking right. And I saw him and I says, "Hey sir, can I help you find somebody? Looks like you're looking for somebody." And he says, "Yeah, I'm looking for someone to come to work." And I said, "I'm looking for a job." And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can we talk?" I said, "Yeah." He said, I went and asked the folks in the office, "Can we use the conference room?" And she said, "Well, sure." We went in there and we sat down, and I bet we spent a couple of hours talking about working. And when that time was up, I had 4 positions offered to me, just from talking with an alum of Mississippi State University. And so my first professional job, I wound up going and working for the Dow Chemical Company as a senior research scientist. That man's name was Hunter Henry. Ring a bell to you? So that was my first professional job. Here's the other cultural shock. Moving from Mississippi, born, raised, hardly ever left the city, moving to Milton, Michigan, where in 1977 they had the blizzard of 1977. That's a longer story. But it was a wonderful opportunity to discover that the world was bigger than Mississippi State, bigger than Starkville, Mississippi, and you had an awesome opportunity to do all the kinds of things you would ever imagine you wanted to do as a scientist. And so that was my introduction to professionalism there. I stayed there 5 years, and I wound up being recruited to the Missouri University of Science and Technology. Actually, I wasn't looking for it, it just kind of fell in my lap. But on thinking about it, that was my first goal. Let me find me one of those academic positions. Well, this was a perfect fit, hand in glove. Wound up spending 36 years there, and served in every practical capacity, faculty member, all the way up to professor, department chair, associate dean, vice provost. They asked me to fill the application out because they were looking for a chancellor for the university, and I said, nope. I started a small business, the Alliance for Advanced Coatings Research, and ran that for 18 years. But when Shirley and I moved from Missouri, I discovered that this was not a problem. So I discovered that I couldn't operate it in Tennessee. So I wound up shutting that down. And I taught martial arts for 45 years. And I thought, I'm going to come down to Tennessee and I'll keep doing it. I'll be 70 years old. And well, I just had the body just couldn't take it. But it's been a wonderful experience because one of the passions I had the opportunity to expand was doing things to help students be more successful.
Yeah.
And that's my passion now. So every opportunity I get to consult with higher institutions, talk to students, give them pointers inside, outside, understand that you can be successful. I don't care if you study chemistry. You can be successful at anything you want to pursue.
I'll try to be brief. May of 1972, I graduated. May of 1970, 27th of May, 1972, I got commissioned. On the 28th, I graduated from Mississippi State. Anybody remember Vietnam, the lottery, the draft, all that kind of stuff? got my commission, and it turns out, and really I didn't even realize this until actually years later, that I was the first African American to get a commission in the Army from Mississippi State.
Any service.
Any service. And so I graduated, went to Germany for 3 years, spent about 2 years on active duty in the States. This is not really what I want. So I still stayed in the Army Reserves. I was working for Pepsi-Cola, for General Electric, and for Walmart, all in logistics. So total about 20 plus years in the Army Reserves. And 9/11. I remember that, September 9/11. In December of that same year, I'm in the Middle East. Stayed there off and on for a total of about 5 years. Total service about, actually, I was actually retired for 3 days and they called me back. So I did a total of 31 years between Army Reserve and active duty. Along the line, she's looking away. Along the line, during this active duty reserve transition, met my wife, General retired Margaret Barr. And I guess that's enough. That's a lifetime of love. Glad to be here.
We have any questions? They are going to hang around for a little bit for our reception. Anybody have questions?
I'd like to learn more about how, like, what student life was like for you guys. You mentioned that Afro-American Plus was community in an uncomfortable place. Was life outside that community uncomfortable, besides just being unfamiliar?
Yeah, it was unfamiliar, yes, that's true. That's a true statement. However, we did find community within that group. And as the years went on, the community expanded in numbers and also in access to other things that we were doing. For example, the first fraternity was started in 74, 75. And then sororities came shortly thereafter. And then you got the Black Voices was founded in 72, 73. So, and then you had other organizations, and not only just, quote, black organizations, but you became officers in other organizations. So the expanse, the student life became more than just a YMCA building. As a matter of fact, in the 1980s, maybe 90s, early 90s or something, I think it was John Madison, I came on campus and I said, what's going on at the Y? And the kids looked at me, these are the black kids, they looked at me like, I don't know. So, to answer your question, community life expanded to more than just people that looked like us. And I just put a period at the end of that.
I think it's the usual challenges that students have, sense of belonging, a lot of isolation, even if you think it's day-to-day going to class. If you took one of those classes that required a person to work with you, like a laboratory, for example, and you needed a lab partner. I recall it being really difficult to have people volunteer to partner up with me for the lab and stuff. But what happened was you gained some great insight about resilience and doing things that needed to be done and learning not to have simple things be barriers for you. To me, that was critically important. As a matter of fact, I think, at least from my perspective, it actually helped students or helped me to demonstrate that I can learn anything. And I think faculty and departments saw that because you start to experience that those faculty became resources for you. They'd reach out, they'd support you. Linda mentioned getting a job and working on campus. I had to do work study as well. They assigned me to the cafeteria. The thing I learned first day was you take those water glasses, you wet your finger and you can run around the rim of it and it starts singing. I learned that.
Serve attention to
Well, that has a lot to do with it.
It's chemistry.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it's chemistry stuff.
I discovered I didn't want to do that. So I went over and talked to Department Chair at the time in chemistry and says, you know, I qualified work study and I really love to have a job over here because I can learn stuff. He said, we don't have any work study students. And I went back over to the work study office and I said, what do you do to have a department that don't take work study students and take work study students? And I explained to him what I wanted. I went back over and above the department chair again and I says, well, you can have work study students if you wanted to. And bottom line, he said, okay, I got a job for you. Dr. Emmerich was his name. I got a job for you. The chemical storeroom over there. And at the time, it was a mess. I mean, a real mess. Do you know what I said? If I wanted to learn about chemicals and how they're stored and what to do with them and how to dispose of them and what's safety about them, what's better place to learn to do that than over there? That was my first job. As a matter of fact, that job helped me land another job in that department, preparing solutions for the freshman chem labs. As a matter of fact, the little lab that they make solutions up in turned out to be my home office for the next 7, 8 years. Actually, my private office, but that's the only thing. And so, yes, you discover your resources, and you learn how to take advantage of them. And that's an insight that will carry you from this university anywhere else you want to go.
Excuse me, can I get a question again?
I was asking about student life on campus, if you have any anecdotes as to how the atmosphere felt to you at that time.
I mean, still segregated, but it was different in the dorm. You take over and back out the dorm, all the athletes live there together. So therefore you ate together. And you know, even on teams, it's different when you gotta go to battle with a man. Camaraderie city, you're working with him every day and you help him run another. And you want to excel, you want to be good at it. And think about, you know, being black. I'm only black on the track team. Jerry and Fry were the only ones on the basketball team. So, you know, there was a lot of praying, a lot of encouraging. I see guys, I was at a football game, I saw this guy dancing, his brother dancing on the bench and all that kind of stuff, and it really bothered me. Because back during that time, we were trying to make the squad. We were trying to make traveling teams. We were trying to be the best we could be. Because they didn't come here for you to not necessarily improve. When we came in, you had to be ready. You came in to do what you need to do. They weren't picking you up just to help you improve.
Right.
I've got what might sound like a very small thing, but it does speak to the fact that segregation still existed on the campus. Starting with your assignment in the dorm, you were always assigned a black roommate. And if that number ended up 13 girls, the 13th girl had no roommate. So it was much more important to this institution to keep separation than it was to find another roommate for that 13th student.
You know what was funny, Linda? At this particular time, black females didn't really live on that side of the campus. You had these over here. I was telling them earlier, they had 17 black freshmen here.
He knew the number of black in my dorm. I didn't know.
He was sticking them off. There was 17. And you know, but the camaraderie, as I said, we were there together. And you know, the cooking, they would cook good. They learned, like you say, play big whiz. That was your little community within itself.
Right.
And with me, I kind of made communities. And when I came here, again, I had these guys in the Y, and then my friends. In my second semester, I moved off campus. 3 of us, Sandy Hodge, Jim Bowes, and myself. And into Starville, and that's how I got beat Linda. And so a lot of people, she still says, oh, you just want to be from Starville, but a lot of people thought I was from Starville.
He does.
But, and so that was part of my community. I had a sister at the W, and I had that group, and then we were just talking about, in Columbus, we were visiting with a friend last night whose husband is deceased. But one winter, I decided I was going to work and earn enough money to buy Linda a ring for Christmas. And so I stayed with that family in Columbus during the spring break, so I could work and make money. So I kind of spread my communities all around and was able to, tap in, tap out, and expand my horizons, I guess.
I'm going to say one last thing, and I can never speak for all Black people you'll ever know, but I will tell you something that's almost always true. We know how to make do.
Yeah.
So if the institution does not provide the support and the encouragement, we'll find a way to make it happen.
She is correct.
And was MSU's campus political at that time? Was there a lot of activism on campus?
Well, that's a good question. I meant to say something because I would guarantee you 95% of everyone on the City Millers campus was an activist, without a doubt. And it was, and it's, I'll tell you how far it was, because I can remember when the fraternities started coming on campus, that was a nationwide attempt, mostly in the South, because Black groups like the Afro-American Plus, Black student unions were almost every place on any campus in the United States. But the administrators determined if you bring in fraternities and sororities, and this was their choice, and this is what they said, it would divide their students because they all go into their own corners at this time. And it was somewhat successful time in the 80s here because it was like, you thought you were at war, the fraternities and sororities, and so the Black fraternities were on campus. But no, there's always been a barrier there against us, and always looking forward, even to this day, in the state of Mississippi, where education is not important. I mean, education at the bottom of the list was said this, which the governor, the legislature, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of state, whatever, education is secondary, and I think will always be that way. And to me, that's one of the biggest challenges. But anyway, I'll stop at that.
We can stay here all afternoon.
Yeah.
I love listening to y'all. I want to thank our panelists. We give them a round of applause. And we have a little gift for you before I have our Associate Dean, David Nolan, close us out. Gift for you guys.
Is it my diploma?
No, it's forgiveness for those parking tickets.
Oh, man.
These are for all of you, and you can open them, and I have an additional one for Ambrose. So Ambrose, he's put this all working.
Ambrose, our chief of staff.
Yeah, he certainly does.
I heard this.
Wow.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I had no idea where I was supposed
All right, everybody. It is time to ring your bell.
Oh, there's
Yeah, mine have a muffler.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Well, it is my privilege here this afternoon just to close out what I think has been a fantastic program today. So I want to take a moment and just kind of thank some of the people who have had a hand in making this possible today. I know there are a lot of people involved in bringing something like this that's so special together. And so I want to name a few of the people that I know contributed directly to this. Just a caveat, I'm certain that there are many people who had a hand in this that I don't even know contributed. And so please forgive my ignorance if I don't mention you by name. But first off, I want to thank the administration of MSU Libraries for all their support for this event, especially Dean of Libraries Liz Pankel and Business Manager Chris Cobb. I also want to thank all the members of the MSU Libraries Events Committee who help with so many of the logistics in events like this. Patty Archer, Stephen Canetto, Linda Graham, James Mize, Waverly Oakley, and Julie Shedd. And I also want to mention Trent Cochran, Paul Huddleston, Von Keisha Hyatt, Diana Janis, Denisha Smiley, and Josh Tucker. Special thanks to our faculty, staff, and students who worked on the digital presence that goes along with this event and helps commemorate the earliest years of Black history on this campus. Lauren Geiger, Emily Harrison, Carly Hill, Jana Hill, no relation, Ben Hillerman, and Brad Johnston. I want to especially thank Jessica Perkins Smith, our university archivist, for all her work in bringing the vision for this. And special thanks again to all the members of the Black Alumni Group who have made this possible in the first place. Thank you to our panelists here today for sharing your stories with us this afternoon, but also thank you for the contributions that you have made to making MSU what it is today. I love the theme of being remembered for the impact that you made, and all of you are helping us make sure these stories are remembered and that impact is remembered. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I hope you'll stay for this reception that we have and continued conversation here. So thank you so much.